And you're welcome back to this week's Unfiltered Autistic podcast with your host, myself, Amanda McGuinness. I guess this week I wanted to talk about, I suppose they're all personal topics, it's the Unfiltered Autistic podcast, but a podcast, I suppose, that focused on autistic identification, or depending on where you're listening to this podcast or understanding, or where your understanding, I suppose, of autistic identity and culture may be, maybe diagnosis of being autistic, or in the older language, having autism, which I really don't ascribe to. So I prefer the language of autistic identification. And I suppose there's two contexts within which I'm interested to discuss this topic. One of which is as an autistic person. I guess as a person that was identified later in life, I was identified at the age of 39. If you're wondering why I'm saying identified, the old way of saying this might be diagnosed. I would have been diagnosed as autistic at the age of 39. But before that, I was clearly autistic all of my life, especially now when I reflect back over my life with that kind of professional lens. And I suppose the other context for me to talk on this topic today is as a parent to 3 autistic children, and why I feel it's important that autistic children understand that they are autistic as early as possible. Now, I do understand as a parent to autistic children, or to 3 autistic children, that sometimes this information isn't available to parents until perhaps later in the child's life. For example, whereas my youngest son, Max, when he was 3 months old, I distinctly remember ringing the school that he goes to now. I was actually chatting to a parent about this earlier. I remember ringing the school that he goes to now. He goes to an incredible school. And I remember ringing the principal at that time. He was only 3 months old, saying, "Oh, hello." I won't say the principal's name, but I was like, "Oh, hello" to the principal. I said, "I just wanted to inquire, could I put Max's name down for the autism class?" Because they have a fabulous autism class where he goes to school. And he was saying, "Oh, did you not just have that baby?" And I was saying, "I did." I said, "I believe he's autistic, so I want to have his name down good and early, because obviously, it being the incredible school that it is, I didn't want to miss out on that opportunity for my youngest of my 3 autistic sons to also be able to go there." And again, he offered me reassurances that absolutely, if it was a thing that Max would like to go to the autism class and needed to go to the autism class, and absolutely that place would be available. But it struck me that people found it unusual that I was saying at 3 months old that my gorgeous Max is or was autistic. And I suppose from other people's perspectives, they were just seeing, a 3-month-old baby. But what I was seeing was a baby that was very unique, but very unique in a very specific, particular way. Not exactly the same as his autistic brothers, but the commonalities were there for sure. And I remember thinking, gosh, isn't it a great thing to know that my gorgeous Max is autistic this early, and to know how to support him this early? Whereas when my beautiful Connor was born, my eldest autistic son, I knew immediately that there were differences. But what I didn't know at that time was that he was autistic, because I didn't have the knowledge base then that I have now, but in particular had when my beautiful Max was born. And it just got me thinking about it. I suppose today I was chatting to a lovely parent earlier on a call, and we were talking about autistic identity and culture. And I was saying it's a great thing for the parents to know, but also for the autistic child to know that they're autistic. And you might say, well, when should we say it? And how do we say it? Or should we ever say it? Or what's the importance of a child knowing that they're autistic? And I suppose as an adult that grew up throughout all of my life, sorry, Mayo accent, throughout all of my life, not knowing that I was autistic, I didn't need the diagnosis to tell me that I was different. I knew. And when I talk to other autistic people, they say exactly the same, that they knew all of their lives from a very young age. And I know that, oh gosh, I think there was research undertaken during the time of the pandemic. I'm going to say, I believe it was the account, The Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. Again, I could be completely wrong, but do accept my apologies if I am. They undertook research, and in that research, it was showing that even as young as infants, autistic people can remember feeling quite different from that very early on age. And that they had well over 10,000 people participate in that research. Again, that's anecdotal research from our community directly, but again, valid nonetheless, because that's autistic people speaking directly about their experiences. And again, for myself, I would have felt very early on a feeling of I suppose difference or separation, not separated from my family, or I had a lovely family and everything, but it was more that I could be in the busiest of rooms and have felt completely clueless. But if you asked me about a topic I did interest in, I suppose more specifically academics, I could answer that so confidently and didn't mind putting up my hand, didn't mind answering the questions. But for most of my young life, and in particular my teen life, is very, I suppose, effervescent in my memory. I would often think about, but how is it possible that I find the school day so draining? And how is it possible that I'm always nearly hypervigilantly watching around the room for what's happening or what should be happening or what I anticipate is happening? And often I would obviously get that wrong, because I suppose as a research-led mind, it didn't always make sense to me. But what would have made a lot of difference to me and what would have helped me frame my understanding of the world is if I had known early on that I was autistic. And I suppose back in those days, the information that's available about autism wasn't available back then, or certainly wasn't available to me and my family. I suppose from my perspective, why is it so important that we tell our children they're autistic early on? And this is something that I do myself as a parent. And this is only my own personal opinion, but I know it's an opinion that's shared by many of the autistic community. I think the first and foremost really is to reduce that kind of self-understanding confusion and I suppose also confusion of others about who I am and what I'm about in the world. Even as a very young child, I take it really, really seriously that I make sure my boys know that they're autistic, that they know that, say, other family members are not, but that they are. What does that mean? What does it mean to be autistic? And again, depending on their age and their capacity to understand, I'm very conscious that, this is something that they're going to learn about for the rest of their lives. So it's not a one conversation and finish, but it's exploring what does it mean to be autistic, helping them to develop that positive identity and culture, understanding that the things that they like, that many other autistic people like. And for example, when I was a very young child, and this will definitely reveal my age, when I was very young, I used to like to listen to, like Oasis actually, but I used to listen to it on repeat on a CD player, which would really show my age. I had a CD player and I would listen to it on repeat at night time to help me to go to sleep, because if I could play it on repeat, this is obviously just for myself, I could slow down my mind and I could help my mind to go into a nice deep sleep. Whereas if I didn't, I would find it more difficult to fall asleep. Now again, this is not a professional recommendation, this is just what I did. But I did find that if I did that, it would help me sleep. Or if I was ever feeling a little bit anxious or a bit unsure, if I had music on repeat, if I did that for some reason, for my mind, it slowed down my mind and I felt a little bit more relaxed. Or if I was having a really tricky day, as I would call it, socially out and about, or if I had to go to something very social, when I would get home again, if I engaged in things that really set my mind alight, for example, researching English in particular, novels in particular back in those days when I was younger, Elizabethan, Shakespeare, things like that, that interested my mind at that time, I used to find that I'd feel a lot better afterwards. I'd feel more like me. Whatever me was, I felt more like that afterwards. And I suppose when we look at the context of the why should we support our, I suppose, incredible autistic children, teens, young adults to understand that they're autistic, it's so that they really do have that better sense of self. When I think about, I suppose, another key piece that's really helped me as an autistic person is that after I was identified as autistic as an adult, I was able to reach out to other autistic adults in the community. I was able to look up to role models and feel like it's okay to be me, it's okay to be different. There is so and so, and they're autistic and they're unashamedly so. And maybe one day when I can understand myself better, maybe I can be like that too, or maybe I can be a role model, or maybe I can just be myself. And I remember one thing distinctly from after being identified. And again, I had done enough research over the course of my life as a parent to autistic children to understand that I was autistic. But for me, in my research-driven mind, I needed to go to, I suppose, a professional who didn't know me, didn't know anything about me, who could assess me and let me know, was I or was I not autistic? I felt strongly that I was. And again, just to say on this podcast, self-identification is valid. Again, I would have understood that I was autistic long before I ever clicked that word apply to be assessed formally. But for my own knowledge base, I needed somebody objective to let me know that I formally, or as I say, officially was autistic. And that was to help me then, I suppose, decide that yes, I was in agreement with this person that didn't know me that I was autistic, even though I had that research done that clearly was saying to me, you are autistic, Amanda. And I was saying, I know, but I just want someone that doesn't know me to tell me that I am, so I can trust in that. Because I suppose as an autistic person that's grown up all of their lives unidentified, I had a strong sense of I can't trust my own mind because I get things, inverted commas, wrong all the time. I drop clangers or say the wrong thing all the time. So if I can't trust my own mind, then I need to ask somebody else to tell me about my own mind, even though ultimately we came to the same decision that I am and I was autistic. But one of the things that stand out to me about that assessment process is that after I, was going through the process and I was eventually did all the different pieces to go for an assessment, formally when I had my, report and was telling me that I was autistic, that searching feeling or that searching voice in my mind that was always wondering, but is it because X? Are you like this because? Is it? I wonder. It was almost like, and I won't do it now because I hurt somebody's ears on the podcast, but it was almost like a door closing but loud. All I can make it, or to let you know what it sounds like, it was like a loud clap. It was like, I'm not going to do it now, but it was like the door was shut. And now that feeling of searching and that feeling of looking for the answers or questioning was now gone, because now suddenly I wasn't looking for the answers anymore. I suppose really what I wanted was somebody who didn't know me to tell me that I was right, that this time you were right. You do understand yourself. You are autistic. You were right. Because I suppose I felt much of my life I was wrong for things I got wrong all the time. But I suppose the psychologist helped me to understand that what I saw as I was getting it wrong through the double empathy theory actually meant we were probably both getting it a little bit wrong. We were finding it a bit tricky, whatever those scenarios or situations were. And I think as an autistic adult at that point, that really helped me. But then also, I suppose, after the diagnosis came a period of reflecting over all the times I'd had those difficult moments, or all those times where maybe it wasn't actually my fault, and perhaps I had been treated really poorly. This is all through my, I suppose, lifetime in different scenarios. Sometimes I'm sure things were my fault. I absolutely agree they probably were. But sometimes maybe it was how I was being treated poorly, and my reaction was trauma to how I was being treated. It was really helpful in that regard to help me look back over my life. But there was definitely a strong sense of grief of if only I had known sooner. And I know from talking, I suppose, to other autistic people, there's a strong sense of if I had known sooner, then maybe somebody could have kind of advocated for my needs, saw the strengths that I had, saw the challenges that I faced, but would have maybe applied for accommodations or provided accommodations to me, would have, instead of assuming when I would be, I suppose, very direct in my language, assume I was being rude, instead understand that actually, no, I wasn't being rude. I was just being very direct because that's my communication style. And if they really knew me, then they'd know I have a great sense of empathy, and I would feel terribly sad if I had upset anybody afterwards. Once I realised that maybe they had misinterpreted what I had said, or maybe I'd misinterpreted at the outset what was being asked of me, and I had reacted or I suppose spoken in a way that wasn't expected or whatnot. I think for me, that would have really helped me, and that kind of internalized ableism would have really been abated, because I wouldn't have spent a whole lifetime wondering, inverted commas, this is the way I used to think, what was wrong with me? Why can't I just be like X? I have fabulous brothers and sisters. Why can't I be as, forward thinking as them? Why do I always ruminate over things of the past? Why do I sometimes get things, inverted commas, wrong where they find it so easy? Why do I find these social scenarios so challenging and triggering and overwhelming? Why can't I just be like everybody else? And I think that's one of the pieces that I suppose really supported me looking back now. But I just think, isn't it sad that I had to live a whole life without fully understanding myself? So I would have spent almost 30, almost 40 years blaming myself for many things that probably weren't even my fault. And I think that's a very common experience in the autistic community. So that's why I feel, wouldn't it be great for our children that if they understood early that they were autistic, and that the differences that they have aren't a terrible thing, because in society, in fact, all of our children, we're all actually different. Or as human beings, we're all actually different. And to grow up with that sense of it's okay that I'm different, and it doesn't matter that sometimes I get things wrong. Sometimes still, many times still, I will get things wrong. And often it is because I am autistic, and because my cognitive processing will always be autistic. But now I just say to myself, instead of me like worrying about it for quite literally 20 years, I'll just say to myself, oh, well, autism moment, and then I get out my life again, and I just go, oh, look, Amanda, this is why that was tricky there. Autism moment, move on with your life. And again, this is wherein I would obviously not intentionally or unintentionally cause harm to anybody. This would be just a general, as I would call it, social clanger moment, where I say the wrong thing, or totally misunderstand something. Instead of me feeling so ashamed that I got it wrong again, now instead I just say, well, what can you do? That's probably going to happen again tomorrow, so I'll just move on with my life now. I think that's one thing that was really helpful. I think also understanding that I'm autistic has really helped me with my own relationships, with my family, with my friends, because they understand me, I understand them. And for example, one of my beautiful sisters, her birthday, significant birthday, is coming up in December, and it was said immediately, like, you don't need to come if you think it's going to be too much for you, but we're also going to do a dinner later in December. And I was saying, oh, would you mind so if I don't come? It's like a very social thing of, I suppose, getting on and off a bus and going in and out to like a pub type situation. I was thinking, by the time I get to the 12th pub, I'd say my brain will just explode with all of the navigating the transitions on and off the bus and in and out. And I mean, of course, I'll have a few gins myself, but I do know myself, and I know that for me that would have been a bit too much. So it's been great for me in my relationships with my family, so they don't see me as avoiding their special events. They know that it's too much for me. So instead, I go to the pieces that I can go to, and I avoid the ones that are too much for me. And they've always been incredibly supportive, but even in this context, massively supportive. So instead, I'll miss the significant bus activity, and I will instead go for the dinner. The quieter, more kind of, there's a start, a middle and an end, and I go home then again to my little puddings, as I say. I think it also has supported me in my advocacy skills, in how I can ask for accommodations, but even as a parent, to show my autistic children how they can advocate. I have one of those, or many of those for the children as well, the ID cards that identify myself as autistic if I need to, I suppose, inquire or seek accommodations in a setting. meeting, I will often wear that and the boys will wear theirs, and we'll kind of model the use of those ID cards and model how to request accommodations. And it's a great thing for them to see that mammy, that they hopefully in some which way, and I don't mean look up to in the sense of ego, but just that I'm their mom and I'm there to really support them, that hopefully when they look to me as a guide for them, they see that mom is also autistic and it's okay for mom to ask for help. That means I can ask for help too, because all the time I'm trying to model for them, I suppose, that which I wish to pass on to them, I suppose, my legacy, and that they can understand who they are, what they're all about, and that it's okay to be themselves as much as they would like to be, and to advocate for their needs. I think as well in the context of home, I'm not sure if this video will go out or not onto my YouTube channel, but it might. But if you can see in the background of this video, I have, for example, the background is painted a dark navy. I have my favourite colour of yellow, and then I've also different kind of, I suppose, adornments of rainbow type colours. But like, I create in this office my environment that suits my processing, that suits my cognitive style, that suits me as an autistic person, because I know how to set up my environment. Outside the door of my office is the rest of my home, and again, I set that up to suit all of my children's, I suppose, environments that suit all of their needs. Again, it's a bit of a Ferris wheel of people hopping on and off and trying to get things in exactly the right rhythm. But as much as I can, I try to make home the haven for my gorgeous puddings. And just as it occurred to me there, when I think about what it was like growing up unidentified, there was a poem that I used to actually say within my mind, because I didn't want to write it down, because I felt if I wrote it down, then somebody else would agree and say, oh, I read your poem. Yeah, we agree that it's you are different. And I believe the poem, again, I'm sure I'll stumble over this because I have to think very literally in my head to what I can see in my mind. And I went something like, here I lie awake, and in this dream I hope to take a strong way out before I break. Here I lie awake. And I remember when I eventually wrote that down, I wrote it in the back of a book called Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, that I would have had in secondary school. I found it many years ago when I moved to this house, actually. And when I used to write that down, I used to write the word L-I-E to say I lie, as in I am lying, I'm wide awake, but I'm not laying down in the way the person might read the poem. It meant I'm lying lying, as in not telling the truth of who I am while I am awake in the world. And the strong way out was, someday I can be myself, but for now I cannot. And I was writing that poem from a very, very young age. I used to sit on a bed in a bedroom I shared with my beautiful sister. And there used to be like a light switch behind my head if I was sitting up on the bed, and I used to flick it on and off of the back of my head, and I would just be sitting there thinking that. But again, it never occurred to me from a social imagination perspective to say to my parents or to say to my lovely sister or to the rest of my lovely family how I was feeling. But I would just internalize all of these feelings and carry it with me then for the rest of my life. So what I would hate to happen is that anyone listening, your own gorgeous family, my beautiful family, I'd hate for them to have any of those feelings, and then also be hyper aware that they may be having similar feelings, maybe not the same as me, but they may not be occurring to them to talk to you about it. And when we look at, I suppose, the landscape of mental health, not only across the world globally, but is specific to the neurodivergent community, it is quite startling that many of our community do struggle. And I just feel any opportunity that we have to support our community members to not struggle, that we should really, really think about the why behind why we do or we don't do something. In this context, why should we be telling our children that they're autistic? Again, this is my own personal opinion, but in my own personal opinion, I feel like it really is important that we do, because whether you tell your child now or not that they're autistic, or you tell them now or not in the future that they're autistic, they will already have been growing up with that sense of being different. They may not be able to put a label on it. They may not be able to maybe even verbalize it to you, whether they're speaking, non-speaking, but they will have that sense of other. And I know that would be a strong feeling within our incredible autistic community, that sense of being other. And I would hate to think that my own gorgeous children would have that feeling. And again, I cannot be the protector of all. I cannot support them to ultimately never feel pain or fear or wondering or feeling of other. But what I can do is clarify and provide that information for them in a context, in a manner within which they can understand. I suppose then, is there another piece? I suppose there's a strong piece around harm, self-harm. If you've grown up all of your life feeling different, you are unfortunately going to potentially, as would have been my own, I suppose, experience, blame yourself. I definitely would have engaged in self-harming. I definitely would have engaged in self-loathing. I definitely would have engaged in a lot of negative self-talk, because I didn't understand why it was everyone else around me appeared to understand what was happening, could engage in all the activities I really would have loved to have been able to engage in, but ultimately I just couldn't. It was too much for me. It was always too much for me. And then I would end up, God help my mother and father, come home like a volcano and erupt after school, or would just high mask. Now I know now that's what I was doing, high masking, but I would just essentially try and get through the day, appear to be having the time of my life like everyone else, but actually ultimately being so overwhelmed all of the time. I think what's really interesting in this context as well of not knowing that you're autistic, it had a negative impact on my academic career as well. And that is that when I went into fourth year of secondary school, if you think about up to junior cert, how structured your secondary school is, your timetable is, how everything goes for you, because you're gearing up towards exams. Many people don't know this, Bar will say, the people that went to school with me. I actually dropped out of secondary school in fourth year. I was halfway through the year. I just couldn't take it anymore. And it wasn't that it was a lovely school. It was a fabulous school. It was a lovely environment. But the point was the structure and routine I'd relied on for, we'll say, the junior cert. And that would have been, I suppose, depending where you're watching or listening to this, that would have been, I was the equivalent of an exam that you might take at 15, 16 years of age, like a state exam. I was so used to studying the research, the things that I thrived on, that suddenly when I got to fourth year, that was all taken away, because now you're growing into your person, you're experiencing the world, you're going out on work experience, you're doing lots of different things. But that structure routine that I had really thrived on was now essentially taken from me. And it's not that someone took it from me specifically, it was across the board. We're now giving this year to grow and develop, which I suppose in a sense I did. But ultimately I dropped out of secondary school to the shock of everyone, because I was highly academic. And I dropped out of secondary school because I couldn't take it anymore. And I can distinctly remember my mother standing over my bed and saying to me, Amanda, will you get out of the bed and go into school? And I was saying, there is no way I'm going into school. So I was essentially school avoidant, to the point that they could not get me to return to school. And then for fifth year, which would be out the equivalent then of maybe 16, 17, they tried to get me to go back to school. I went in for the first portion of the year. Then I kept dropping in and dropping out. But again, I couldn't get back into the capacity that I'd had, say, at third year. I wasn't able to get back into that routine of studying, researching. I couldn't do it anymore. I was totally burnt out. I recognise that now, that that's what it was. But at the time, I just knew that it caused me so much anxiety. I just didn't want to leave my bedroom. Or if I had to leave, I would just work in jobs around the clock, because I preferred that structure, routine and knowing of what was happening. Eventually, my dad came to me when I think I dropped out again at fifth year. And he said to me that if I completed fifth year for the second time, this time go back and actually complete the year and do the exams and finish, that he would send me to, because he knew I loved Galway, that he would send me to a private school in Galway, which was called Yates College at the time, which was like essentially a study school for the Leaving Cert, which would be our final exams, depending on where you're listening to this. So your final exams before you go to university. And I remember saying, well, if I go in and then I can go to Galway for the year. He said, yeah, you can go to Galway. I'll pay for you to stay up there and you can go to that private school for the year. So I was like, okay, that's a deal. So he kind of got my motivation locked in. I'm not suggesting we offer, private schools to all of our children, but that's what was motivating for me to give me the courage to go back and try. Because ultimately, at the end of it for me was that I get to go to a place I loved, and then I also got to stay there day in, day out for X amount of time, until the Leaving Cert was over. But also the idea of going to a study school really probably engaged nobody else's mind but mine. But I was really wanting to do that because that's how my mind worked. As it was, my mom and my dad could see that that's what would help me. So they agreed to it. Again, I got through fifth year, came out of it flying colours, went off to Yates College, again, got an excellent Leaving Cert, and then went off to university. But if it wasn't for my parents understanding who I was and how my mind worked, I probably wouldn't have gone back to secondary school, because I just didn't have the courage within me. And it wasn't because I didn't have a lovely school, because I did, and I had lovely friends. But for me, it was all too much, and I couldn't overcome the barriers that I was faced with, which was, I suppose, unpredictability. I suppose social pressures were really hyping up around that ages of 15, 16, 17. People were starting to go out, get into relationships. And from my perspective, I didn't even understand half of what was going on, let alone be in school every day faced with it. So for me, that really supported me. But again, if it had been known that I was autistic at that point, they could have planned for fourth year. It'll be tricky for Amanda, perhaps she'll skip. And I wouldn't have said no, I suppose, if I thought about it at the time, but it didn't occur to me at the time as that being an option. There have been lots of things that could have come into play that would have supported me. Especially my mental health could have been supported, and I wouldn't have had that kind of long sense of what's wrong with you, why can't you get it right. I suppose as well, what's been really helpful to me post identification is that online, through my social media, littlepuddins.ie or Amanda McGuinness study. If you look on Instagram in particular, you'll see I draw a character called Autie, and Autie has a neurodivergent symbol in their hair. And I never really identify Autie as being representing any particular part of society. It's just an individual that's neurodivergent, and the purpose of the ribbon in the hair, or sorry, not the ribbon, the neurodivergent symbol in the hair, is to represent the neurodivergent brain. So the brain type is different. So the benefit of me knowing now as an autistic adult is that I know where I belong now. I no longer search. I know I'm an autistic person, and through my social media I get to read all of the really interesting comments and arguments sometimes that take place on my social media with people talking about their own lived experiences, or people that don't understand lived experiences, sometimes unfortunately talking about being autistic, not autistic people that don't understand autistic identity and culture in a not so positive way, and people coming back with the really valid arguments and discussions. And it's really, really interesting. But for me, it really creates creates a strong sense of community around me, even though it's just a character that I happen to draw. But I know it means a lot to a lot of people. So for that reason, I continue to draw. But I suppose, wouldn't it be great for our own autistic children growing up that they know that they're autistic, that they know that there's people just like them in the world that have interests just like them, or that have interests different to them, but there's similarities, that they don't feel so alone, and that sense of other doesn't exist. I suppose for me, on the context of academics, which it always comes back to for me personally, it also meant that when I look back now at my life at university, when I was studying law, many people, for example, when we were studying statute, for example, or the Constitution, might have been writing down facts and figures and pieces of information about different articles and whatnot. When I was in university, I would draw pictures to represent what I could see. I suppose in the context of the Constitution, I might have, this is literally what I would have done. I have actually one here on the table, a yellow highlighter. I would have highlighted the Constitution piece that I had to understand, highlight it in yellow and write the word here. Because I'm a hyperfant, I have a very vivid, very strong visual memory or photographic memory. I would then read over the page of, say, the Constitution, and then I would say, this might sound very strange, but I would say to myself, what can you see? What can you see? Can you see it in your head? What can you see? And I'd look back through my mind of what I could see. Actually doing it now as I think about it, I could look back over the page and see exactly what I could see. And then I would go in and sit the exam and write the answers verbatim of what was on the page in front of me, but in my mind. Same when I would study the case law for a law, say it was Burke versus O'Brien, I would then draw out the characters of what I thought the case was about, and then I would highlight the writing. Sorry, the writing would be in black, highlight it in yellow, and then I draw the outcome with the judgment symbols, and I would draw out what I believe the judgment was, and then I would flick through those quickly in my mind before I do exams. Then I would go and sit the exams, and I could just recall, not always perfectly, but often perfectly, what I believe the case to be about, and use that then to write my exam papers. And again, I would often, I'm not going to say always, I'm sure there was times that I didn't have the best day. Perhaps I'd gone out the night before with my friends, but again, ultimately it saw me very well to university. And when I look back now, I know that's why I was doing that. I just happened to do that because I knew that's how I learned when I was younger. But wouldn't it have been a great thing for me to have known that I had this very unique skill, and that how I learned was because I am or I was autistic? And I think, wouldn't that be a great thing for our children to know that the reason they learn more visually and more easily visually is because they're autistic? So instead of me seeing it as, why can't I just take notes like everybody else in college? Why do I have to draw them out to remember them? Wouldn't it have been a great thing for me to be like, God, this is a great skill that I can have, and then I can also use this more in my life to support myself forward. I suppose more than anything, it supports parents as well once they understand that their children are autistic, to advocate for them. And I know above anything else, parents are incredible advocates. But I think really, if parents can understand their child being autistic in a really neuroaffirmative, really positive way, then they can be that first advocate that their child looks upon, that says, my mom, my dad, my parents, whoever they are my carers, they really believe in me, and they know that the differences that I have are unique, but unique in a really special way, that they stand up for me, that they advocate for me. And that's what I suppose I try to do as a parent. Doesn't mean I'm 100% correct, but that's what I try to do for my own sons, that they can understand that they're autistic and what that means for them, and looking at their differences and what does that mean for them, and looking at differences that they have and how they can support themselves through the strengths that they have. And I suppose ultimately how they can be the best version of themselves that they want to be. I never want them to be anything for me. I just want them to be happy if they can be that for themselves. And I want them to grow up knowing that it's a great thing to be autistic, that it's a great thing to know that you're autistic, and that there's many other types of people in the world, but that they themselves being autistic is a wonderful thing, and it's a very special thing to know about yourself, because that means then you can use your mind to do anything that you would like to do, that you can use your unique skill set to achieve anything that you would like to achieve, that you can be the most beautiful version of yourself in the world, and that's okay. And I suppose more than anything, I try to let them know that even on the days that they find tricky, that it's okay. And it's a great thing to have that self-compassion, because I would absolutely hate to think that they would grow up feeling the way that I suppose at times I had felt. But again, I didn't have the social imagination to tell anyone around me that I used to say that poem inside my head, and I used to write it down, because more than anything, I just want them to grow up to feel that they are the center of my world, but that they can be the center of their own worlds, and that they can be empowered to be themselves. They can be empowered to ask for accommodations, that they can meet other people just like them and not feel different. And I suppose more than anything, I don't ever want them to feel like that poem that I would have, I suppose, cited earlier. I don't ever want them to feel outside of themselves, othered, or that they're not the incredible human beings that I know them to be. So that's the end of this week's podcast. Coming up in the next few weeks, I have some very interesting guests for you, and I hope that you are going to be very interested in all of the incredible things that they have to say. So it's quite the treat. So I'll go now, but I will leave you with that poem again to ponder over whether or not it's useful or not to tell your autistic child, or the person you care for, that they are autistic. And that poem went, Here I lie awake, and in this dream I hope to take a strong way out before I break. Here I lie awake. Thank you. See you next week, or you'll hear from me next week. Bye.